What's up, y'all, and welcome to a brand new ShawnSetGO video. Today, we're going to be talking about raiding and the joys and pains that come with that. And this actually comes from our community. So if you haven't joined our community, we have stuff like this all the time where people will post and ask things that they think we should do. But this is a video that was posted. It says, "Hey, Shawn, I don't know if you raid a lot, but maybe there's some content out there about raiding etiquette and how it affects the community." So I kind of wanted to see a couple of different perspectives. I didn't want to just take from my own, though I do have my own perspective on this. I wanted to also cover this from a direction of mythic rating as well, and some of the outside perspectives. But if you're enjoying the content, please, of course, do like and subscribe to the video. We have plenty more content on the War Within and discussion topics just like this that kind of spur good ideas, some not so good ideas, but also just conversations on these topics, because a lot of these things tend to go on for a long time. And let's get to it. So this is what I mean by things going on for a long time. It says mythic raiding is a disaster this tier. I'm going to start the biggest elephant in the room. The current stability issues with the raid are happening since the launch of 11.0.5. For people unaware or do not really notice as much, since this patch launch, you can easily notice the raid that either some of your abilities are delayed or getting DC'd somewhat consistently on certain nights, or some bosses have a weird delay or desync of their abilities. These issues are present in all difficulties, but especially exacerbated on mythic because the margins for error are thinner, and with difficulty curve being what it is this tier, any sort of weirdness happening can make the pool unplayable. So just to discuss that a little bit, I think this has happened to me a couple times, even when it comes to like normals or heroics. It has been really tough on certain fights to where if you are lagging during a simple mechanic, it's totally wipe worthy, especially if it's an important mechanic. For example, I mean, it's as simple as like Silken Court, like the web catching. Like I've had it plenty of times where webs will just unexplained just break, and then will have no purpose, and that, or people will dispel, and it's like the proximity doesn't catch and it doesn't work. So like some of these things are somewhat random, but they're on some of the most important mechanics, it seems. I don't know if it's like a magnet for it, but it just happens a lot. It says, now the lag issues and stability issues are things that mostly brought up in last week's patch, but another issue keeps happening because of tuning. I'm an immense fan of more tuning. I'm grateful that we actually have tuning this patch, especially compared to season 3 of Dragonflight, which was left to rot quite literally. But we need to understand that class tuning cannot be so substantial that when the raid tuning is so rough. Swinging specs within plus or minus 10% margins every week doesn't help, especially when you cannot place the same comp every boss. Yeah, and this is a struggle that you experience, I think, as you get to the latter half of the raid. Whenever your comp, it's going to be much more important that not just you have like dedicated members working on something, but that certain comps just are going to work so much better off in a certain way. And if you don't have that comp set up, and then all of a sudden it's changed, it just makes that part of life so much harder. So like, I know that a lot of people are working against themselves. If you want to look at the rest of this post by HotBooster9858 on Reddit, it was posted a little while ago, but I think a lot of this still holds, and I'll read the end of it here. It says, you have 2,000 guilds stuck at Avinax, and no amount of number of buffs is going to change that. It's the same with Kaiveza, Silken Court, and especially Ansarek. Right now, for greater than 400 world record guild, Ansarek legitimately looks like a 5,000 pull boss, and I'm not even joking. Tyndril looked easier. My guild is on Silken Court, and I don't want to imagine how frustrating this tier must have been for lower end guilds, especially given that Rasharan was easily dead in less than 30 pulls. Yeah, I mean, like, I gotta feel that a lot of this is artificial. You know, it's like artificial lengthening of how long a season can last because of this difficulty that's placed. It's kind of like, to me, I would compare it to the same level of like making I don't know if you've played the Give Me God of War difficulty on God of War, but basically it just makes your enemies just insane bullet sponges to where you're not gonna die on the first set of mechanics or even the second set of mechanics. It's like the fourth or fifth set, just because it takes so long, or things just go so poorly that you have to endure so many mechanics, and eventually someone's gonna slip somewhere. And I think that's the biggest thing, and that's the most important thing that I want to talk about first. So that's the first thing that the person asking me to make this video asked was, maybe there's content about etiquette and how it affects the community. The first thing is that, really, maybe I could put it below. The first thing is that things are going to go wrong for somebody. And I think that it's not best to dwell on these things, especially when you're on or you're in a pug type of raid. But it's best to, if the person doesn't know the mechanic and if they're failing to the mechanic, say you've designated somebody to work on webs, or if you designated somebody that like, hey, we're going to focus on these eggs or these these boss fights, this part in this boss fight, that if they're not doing the mechanic right, to really just, I think the best bet is just give it to somebody else who maybe hasn't done it before, or hasn't done it before, but hasn't done it yet. You know, give it to somebody else instead of just trying to harken on that one person and make it happen and kind of just drill into them to make it work. I've experienced this multiple times as a tank, that when you give people mechanics and they're just not doing the mechanic right, that it's just best to give it to somebody else. It's not good to learn on the job on these things. It's really not helpful for anybody. And after you've wiped multiple times, I promise you, you'll just trust that it's almost always a better idea to give it to somebody else, even if they maybe have less experience with the mechanic. Just because I feel like people really drill into this, and what happens to that one person when they're given that mechanic is they stop DPSing, or they stop doing the thing that they're supposed to do properly to kind of offset it. So just give it to somebody else, switch those mechanics and give it to somebody else. But also be willing to, even if you're not the raid leader, be willing to designate certain people. A lot of things in the Nerub'ar Palace are perfect for ranged DPS, and it's good to designate that ranged DPS as the person. It's not always a good idea just to give it to the melee DPS, even though melee DPS, it's like, I don't want to be like you guys get the parses now. I think unfortunately for melee DPS, you have to deal with a lot more things closer to the boss in this new season, in this new raid, than ever. And a lot of it's because you get pulled, you get pushed, there's a ring, there's a movement. And so with a lot of these things, your melee DPS are dealing with mechanics to avoid death just naturally. This is Ring of Death season. It happens so often. So give it to somebody, give it to a ranged DPS, give it to somebody with high mobility. And when it comes across to these mechanics that are failing and that are not working proper, voice it. Say it. You know, and a lot of times you got to really pay attention sometimes to see that it's happening. But when it's a wipe mechanic, everyone's going to look at you and be like, what happened? So I think that honestly, there's not a lot you can do when it comes to things being buggy, but communication is going to be key. So most important thing for like I said, the first part is just knowing who to designate where and why it's important as well. So and you're going to notice this probably not in normals. I think like LFR and even normal, like you're probably going to notice very little mechanics are there to absolutely wipe you. There are a few, but once you start getting into heroics, there's going to be a lot more. I mean, like even like the second boss has wipe mechanics that are immediately apparent, and if you're not paying attention, even as a tank, if you're not paying attention in your positioning, then you're going to wipe the group. And so that kind of usually is the nail in the coffin. You could be a perfectly set up group, but by the time you get to Silken Court, one wipe, people are leaving, and you'll wonder why, and it's happening because up until that point, things are not really being communicated. So communication really key, always key. Next one is says raid mechanics too hard for the community. So I've been pugging heroic Nerub'ar Palace the last few weeks, and it's been honestly amazing amount of simple mechanics instructions that go ignored by players that are super detrimental to the group's success. A few examples are simply checking your group number. For example, the third boss, raid lead assigns starting position and a direction to take the charges to. I always say whenever I do this boss is I will tank in the center around the inner ring, and then people place your pools on the outer ring. That way, when we're moving, we're moving ahead sort of on the outer circle, like close to the outer circle. But when those pools come up, we're just moving sort of in a counterclockwise or clockwise direction. It's so simple, but no matter what always happens to me is like I'll have a tank that just it'll tank it directly in the center, and then no movement whatsoever, no attempts to move at all. I had like 3 separate tanks who didn't know a simple mechanic, and I'm like, why is this happening so often? But also the DPS, nobody was going to the outer edge. Everyone's just dropping it in the center and going to whoever they're closest to instead of bringing it to the nearest outer ring location. You know, it's like, it's not that hard, but like in reality, if those pools come up and you have no spaces to go, you're dead. Like you're just gone. This is the worst. Brew Twister, egg assignments, raid leads. Yeah. So what I had to happen the most in Brew Twister, or have had in the most in Brew Twister, is people they'll move and they'll go to an egg for the most part. Sometimes they don't even do that, but they'll go to an egg, but they won't go to the egg closest to the boss because I guess they're nervous that that somebody else is going to take it, go to the egg closest to the boss. Worst case scenario, we only hit 2 eggs, you know, like it's not that big of a deal, like, or it's 3 spots, so maybe we only hit 1, really worst case scenario. But in reality, tanks should be positioning the boss in between the 2 like closest eggs to the pools. Go ahead and hit the closest one. I don't care if it's like literally right where you're standing. Hit it, knock it, because in reality, I mean, it's not going to matter up until heroic, because like even in normals, you probably still kill the ad. It's not that big a deal. But the reality of the situation is, I'd much rather you hit the same egg and us get less eggs popped than us hit one towards the center of the room and then not help anybody. It's just like weigh the benefit, the cost benefit analysis. Like always, if you can, and this is something that I personally do, gear for the worst expectations and then play for the worst expectations. Play as if someone's going to mess up the mechanic. So whenever you have web catchers, I always designate 4 people, not just 2 for the mechanic, even though you just need the 1. Now going a bit further, of course, you'll need more, but like I always designate more rather than less, because there's no purpose to messing up a simple mechanic and just being like, what happened? Like, because something will always happen to somebody if you give it enough times to happen. If you put it in the situation, like if you put the mechanic in enough times, someone's going to mess it up one time. Someone's going to not be able to grab, and then you're not going to have enough stops, and it's going to wipe the raid. I'd rather just have a situation where it doesn't. So set yourself with the expectation that things are going to fail, so you can lead yourself to success. Sure, it'll lead to a little less DPS, but in the end, it'll be able to benefit you in that you won't get as much wipes. So always expect that is my I guess my pug recommendation. Of course, if you have a group of people you trust, then lead that way if you can. So soak groups on Queen. This goes back to point number 1: checking your group and knowing where you're supposed to be. Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of it is basically the way I see this the most is odds and evens. People will split up in odds and evens, and you want to 1, split your raid evenly, but 2, you also want to make sure that you stay with your group. This happens even on boss 2. You have one set of people who are going to the other realm, who are going to attack the boss. But as a tank, you're positioning yourself where those portals will appear beforehand. So if you're seeing those portals appear and it's not where you're currently at, everybody needs to move. I've had so many people who will miss their chance to get hit by the frontal and then will just join the other group. And then you have these super uneven groups, and then it just falls apart. Like it just totally falls apart because one side can't keep up. And so the other mechanic, of course, is the side beams, the little hip beams that come out, is positioning that out a little bit ahead of the group that it's supposed to be. So if you're the one who's taunted, you're not in the other realm, positioning yourself a little bit ahead of the mobs that are going to spawn. You'll see it because that portal exists. So these are all mechanics that, of course, like you're going to get from guides, but the most important thing is knowing your group and knowing what group you belong to. And if you do have uneven groups, voicing it as such, because there's enough times that it happens in the raid where it should matter how things are split up, because it's going to immediately affect you when you don't have even groups. And so I do my best to split healers evenly, split range DPS evenly, put a melee DPS in there, or put people who have different buffs and effects in at least, like as evenly as possible, because the amount of times you get split up as a group is the main thing that's going to harm you whenever you have people dying. And so if you have one side of the group who's dying more often than the other side, then you're going to have these totally split up raid groups that one is participating and the other one is just gone. So highly recommend this, split this as evenly as possible. Additionally, if you have a person who is providing tips or trying to help out members, it's best not to have conflicting voices all in the room all at once, because these groups are not going to use likely Discord even up until heroic. I highly recommend that if someone's providing tips that are antithetical to theirs or new different tips just hurts everybody. So have only one chef in the kitchen. Don't have too many chefs in the same kitchen, and everyone else just be like, yes, chef. Just try to adhere to one person's set of rules instead of everybody's. And more importantly than really is just adhere to your assignments. Even if it's at the cost of your DPS, one person's DPS is not going to be crucial enough for the games that, now we can't do it. Adhere to your mechanics. It's going to make you last a lot longer. Sure, fights will be a bit longer too, but in the end, you won't die and you'll get through the fight. I've gotten through some fights. I'm like, I have no idea how we all survived, or I have no idea how we made it, but it was because enough people survived to the end that it worked out. So just really do that. It says portals and orbs and a charge on Princess. So this happens this happens so bad. Like I don't understand why it's so hard, but I gotta stop giving guide tips because this is not a guide video really. What it is everyone knows that on Princess you want to position the portals at the edges of the hexagon, something like that. It's at the edge of the shape, all right, the inner shape. But the portals will move. If you get a portal and you get someone who's charging you, just go to one. If it's at the one on the top left, go either to the top one or the bottom one. Worst case scenario, go to the just stand on another point. Stand on another point, whether it's the nearest or the furthest. Then I, as the tank, I will position it in the empty spot to balance out how it pulls. In a perfect scenario, and a lot of you experienced at least one of these, in a perfect scenario, they're all pulling evenly, so there's no drag, and you're in the center of the fight, you're center of the room, and you fight it. But I've had multiple times when I'm pulling to the other side of the room to offset, because like there's 4 portals on one side and I'm on the other side, that the opposite tank will pull away from me back to the center, and then we just have 5 portals on one side of the room, and then everyone gets dragged in and dies. So portals get set, but portals need to move. So when it comes to you're getting an on-the-spot assignment in any type of raid, be sure that whenever that comes up, that you're on point, even if it means stopping DPS and positioning yourself more optimally. It helps out the group more often. And like I said, stopping DPS temporarily is never going to hurt them. So just try your best to do that. Additionally, it says enchantments, gems, upgrades on gear. How many players are missing even the simplest cheap upgrades you can get? I will say this is not everything, but gemming is super easy. Most enchantments are at least affordable and doable. And you know which pieces of gear that you're not going to replace for a while. So just go ahead and apply those on those pieces that you need. I've recently I've gotten to the point to where if I apply an enchantment, I have to be careful because I'll get slight benefits or upgrades, but pay attention enough to what is a good upgrade for you. Know your stat priorities and know what your abyss is. That way, when you get it, you can go ahead and put enchantments on it. But the other thing that they're not saying as well is potions. Have your health pots. It's this super affordable. Even if you don't have cooking, go ahead and buy some food. I have like 100 stacks of food, so I always have a food buff. Always have your elixirs and your potions. Your potions for your burst windows and your elixirs for your long-term and your 1-hour potions. It helps out just because it inches your DPS that much more. I, as a tank, often, especially in those big pulls and those big groups and ad groups, I'm straight up topping DPS charts. It's insane. So because of revenge, like it's actually insane how much damage you can do. So don't count yourself out because you're a tank, or don't count yourself out even because you're a healer. Have your potions ready, have your upgrades ready, because even just a little bit can help get you to the end when you think about the long term. I'm not saying for the boss fights, of course, do your mechanics, do your assignments, but in the end, these elixirs last a while. As long as you're staying alive, these things will stay on. So try your best to, 1, stay alive, but 2, get every benefit that you can out of it. Get your upgrades early, and make sure that you're using as much benefit as at your disposal. You might as well. Plenty of these points extend to Mythic Plus world as well. The second to last boss or Aquatic Wake, face the hook, boss, and the ledge. I'm sure there's infinite examples of it. So ultimately, when you think about raid etiquette, there's a few things that I don't want this raid, like a raid etiquette video, to be something that's like, I'm telling you exactly how you need to fight in a raid or like things you're supposed to do. I didn't want this to be a guide, though I kind of went on the level of being a guide. I want this to be sort of a give yourself the most benefit of the doubt, but try not to give it to others until they prove it. And if you're doing a lot of pugs, that's totally fine, but expect things aren't going to go well if there's no communication, or 2, if you're playing the game as if you're going to succeed every time, or you're just hoping for people to succeed. So do your best to do best by yourself. Give yourself the most stat updates or stat upgrades that you can in any way you can. But also, second, you know, whenever it comes to mechanics and doing those things, do or don't do the mechanics that the raid leader is telling you, wherever the tank is, etc., etc. A lot of people, as they get higher in these levels, I've noticed, is like once you see like someone who's like a 630 item level or something like that, they don't get better for everybody else. They get better for themselves. And so the less performance the others are putting out, the less they're going to be willing to give, because they're focusing all inward. So I've noticed a lot of times as people progress in these raids, especially in pugs, they seem to kind of go down the road of, unfortunately, kind of helping themselves. And so what your best bet is in these pugs is to kind of do your best to give to others, so you can succeed as well. Because I mean, like, honestly, it's not going to come immediately. It's not going to happen for you immediately, but you'll notice as your gear starts to get better, and as you get more experience with the raids, you're going to be leading more than you're following. It's just kind of the natural course of things. But in case you're kind of scared or you're kind of worried about what you should do, what you need to do, I also found this post. It says, afraid to lead with normal raids. Here's a copy paste text on how to raid without any leadership experience needed. Of course, first, always watch your boss fights. Very important. It's very good. It only invite people into the raid that have good experience and item level. If that was the case, though, I don't think any group would make it. There's a lot of times that honestly, the item level doesn't reflect the skill. I mean, I would say the very important thing, you know, whenever you're posting, is to let people know your group comp, and then also let people know that you know, if you're not an experienced raid leader, then have someone you can designate as that person, you know, whether it's the high item level person, like, hey, do you mind helping co-raid lead? I think is a really important thing. And then additionally, a lot of people with item level, like, I think item level bias, I think it kind of ruins a lot of groups, because what happens when that person with high item level leaves and everyone knows they have high item level? It's just like, it kind of ruins groups. So I wouldn't depend so much on high item level as it is your team comp, and also people who are willing to lead and assist, as well as kind of set a standard. Usually it's your tanks. Sometimes it can also be but like who are willing to assist with like inviting people. I would say your tanks, though, don't get it mixed up, don't get it twisted. I think for the most part, you want your melee or ranged DPS to kind of be leads. And it's not always that situation, but they're the people with often, if you're not assigned to something, the least responsibility. So kind of look to your high ranking DPS, because they typically know where to not stand in the fire, at least. So if you do get high ranking people, this one kind of goes through each one of the bosses and talks about it a little bit. I personally use the guides from Ready Check Pull. Those are usually easy enough to kind of remind me. I usually do it right before I do a boss fight, or while I'm doing trash pulls, I'm listening to the next boss fight just for reminders, and it usually helps a bunch. But if you need this, you know, this is by Local Anything 191. It says, afraid to lead normal raids. It's a good enough guide to at least kind of get you there. I think if you're going into raids beyond LFR, I think maybe up until Silken Court on normal, you're going to need to do your own research, especially for your class or role. The guides are just the adventure guides, the dungeon guides, raids guides, whatever they are, in-game are just not going to be enough. And deadly boss mods, unfortunately, is only going to get you so far. Now, if you have like weak auras and you have that set up, sometimes that can be enough too, if you just do use that along with your own knowledge base. But my honest recommendation is that anybody kind of do your research, give yourself the most benefit of the doubt, but also treat every raid as if someone might fail the mechanic and might not do it right. And designate enough people to do things proper. You know, like there's an ongoing meme with Queen Ansarek that who's going to pop the bubble? And people say it so many times. I think now it doesn't happen as much, at least in the last few raids I've done. It doesn't happen as much where people accidentally pop the bubble. So I think sometimes mass communication can kind of get people to go, wait, what do people mean by pop the bubble? And it actually does help. So do your best to educate yourself on guides. And even if it's a bit overwhelming, it's okay to say, I don't know this part. Now, if you're in a group that says that says better no fights, I mean, you might be out of place. You might need to stay quiet. But do yourself a favor and try your best to learn those mechanics and you know, try your best to it. If you're given an assignment, then watch a video. Watch a video and know what you're doing if you can. But sometimes, like I said, you know, it's not entirely your fault. And just communication will always be key in these things, and key in these raids for you to to do a little bit better. So that's all I got for this one, guys. I know this one ran a little bit long, but my idea here was to kind of, I don't really do rating videos, but to kind of give you a brief overview of how you can do yourself a service. And so whether this leads you to looking for the best enchantments, embellishments, gems, and stuff like that for your character, looking for the best consumables for your character, looking for like raid guides and bosses. I hope this guides you outward into the world that exists there, because I don't make videos on that, but I promise you they exist everywhere. And even that little tiny bit of minutia can help you get so much momentum in making progress in your raids. So I hope your raid week goes good. Hope your vault is good for you this week. And until next time, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.